Thank you for coming out and attending with us, ladies and gentlemen. We're here for the CLX Forum second annual revision of the book. CLX Forum is an entity put together by Symantec a few years back. Last year, it's the Cybersecurity Leadership Exchange. It's a group of thought leaders and people in the Canadian space that get together and discuss cybersecurity issues from governance and operations and tooling and what have you. Here to help all of us, okay? So last year, 2019, very, very successful delivery of their first book, and it was so successful they thought they would do another one this year. This year's book has 10 separate chapters in it. Each chapter is an author or a couple of authors. Bunch of them sitting at the back there. I highly recommend you grab a paperback copy. I read the fantastic thought leaders in our industry give a Canadian feel and a Canadian bent on cybersecurity, and I feel enriched for having read so. Here, so we have David Dow and Todd Smead from Trillium Health Partners. We have Alex Dow from Mirai Security, Vancouver. And of course we have Bobby Singh from TMX. And I'm going to have you gentlemen introduce yourselves because you can do a much better job of it than I can.
Todd Smead, Lead Security Advisor for Trillium Health Partners. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, wide variety of background, consulting, pen testing, healthcare, also
Bobby Singh, CISO and CTO for the Toronto Stock Exchange. So very humbled and honored to be invited to write the chapter. When I was first asked to write the chapter in the book, I thought there are so many other thought leaders in Toronto and Canada asking me. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Anyway, so it's I guess it's, by the way, my chapter is the last one. If you get to it, you've done well. Yeah, start from the back. Yeah. Anyway, so I've been doing security for quite some time. My role in the book and what I play in the organization is very non-technical. I've got some smart people that do all the technical stuff. I think of myself as more of an evangelist, clear the road pathway for the team to succeed, and that's pretty much what I do all day. So.
Cool. I'm Alex Dow, based out of Vancouver now. I cut my teeth in cybersecurity in Ottawa, working in the Government Security Operations Center for a number of years. So, really the chapter in my book is about my story about moving from living in a tin hat foil world to the modern world, which was out in Vancouver, and how I was really losing the argument of why cloud was insecure, and actually came to the realization of how cloud can actually make you more secure. That's my day job. My next job, I run a not-for-profit out in Vancouver focused on organizing the cybersecurity community through monthly events, and of course our beloved Eastside Vancouver.
Hi everyone, my name is Dave Dow. I work at Trillium Health Partners alongside Todd, and I'm, compared to my esteemed colleagues here, pretty relatively new to the security world. I've been in security for about 5 years. Before that, I come to security from compliance and privacy. So I think that kind of affords me with a bit of a unique perspective on some of the challenges that organizations face as they try and build out and mature a security program in organizations that maybe haven't had to think too much about information security, governance, and the maturity of a program within an organization that doesn't have a lot of compliance requirements. So I think really excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Fair enough, thank you. So one of the common themes that I noticed as I read through all the chapters in the book is this concept of building maturity and starting from somewhere, and what does the road look like as you're progressing through your maturity model in the company. You guys talk about frameworks, and we talk about so one of the gentlemen that's not here now was talking about the education system and how we train students right from grade 6 on up through. Building leadership programs within TMX and having this hub and spoke model where you empower the lines of business and you pick advocates and you train the advocates up within. It's sort of a common thread throughout the entire book that we all have this model of we know where we want to get to, and how do we work with our teams to basically get there. So I'm going to start with Trillium. Can you talk to me about frameworks? Okay.
So I think for us, when I joined the company about 4 years ago, we had an honest conversation with ourselves and took a look, and we recognized the need to adopt a framework. I think that's the first thing, is to understand that need. To say, okay, yeah, we're doing okay as a program, but we need to measure ourselves. Framework, and I think anytime you measure yourself against a framework, you have to be brutally honest with yourselves, because that's the only way that you're going to really make progress, right?
And how do you pick a particular framework? Where do you start?
Yeah, it's challenging for us because we're not a highly regulated industry. Although we're public healthcare, we've got a privacy law that requires us to keep information secure, but it doesn't get prescriptive like other compliance frameworks.
And I noticed the air quote secure.
Right.
Yeah.
It evolves as technology evolves, right? Our requirements will change, so that's kind of the notion. And so, recognizing the cybersecurity framework is really oriented towards critical infrastructure. That was the basis for choosing that framework, and also appreciating there's a good deal of overlap between the various frameworks. It's a matter of just choosing what fits right at that time, and then just using that as a means to go forward. And I think more than anything, it's about changing the conversation within the organization and attempting to really make it a point of conversation so that everyone that you're talking to begins to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, and removing the stigma around frameworks as this sort of a really difficult to understand concept, to really make it actually communicate what's happening to an audience that isn't conversant in the same language we are. And that's kind of where we're kind of attempting to really make some headway.
And I think frameworks afford us the ability to, we are large organizations, but some organizations are smaller. And comparing yourselves against a framework like the CSF, you have the ability to say, this control isn't necessarily a priority for us. It's not something we need to focus.
So let me just comment on frameworks for a second. So look, I totally agree with the comments. I think every organization, including us, have frameworks, and you need to hang your hat on something to say, look, this is how we measure, this is how we measure internally, this is how we measure against the industry, and so forth and so on. But the bad guys don't have a framework, so I don't want you to think that everything happens with the framework. So if you look at a day-to-day job on what the teams are doing in any organization for that matter, yes, there's the framework-based stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that happens doesn't necessarily fits into the framework just because of the fact that bad actors don't have that kind of a restrictions, I guess we're going to call it, or measurements and so forth. So for us is, yes, framework is important, and it gives us a lot of flexibility to say, hey, look, this is how the dashboards are created, KPIs and KRIs and so forth. But we're actually really focused on the fact that what are the anomalies that are coming right from all over the place. So.
And that's an excellent point. And you should never look at, you can have the best compliance or framework or PCI or whatever's out there. Compliance is a starting point for your program, not the finish line. So you can be 100% compliant, and some very large organizations that were PCI compliant over the last couple of years have been compromised. And I think it's because they took a look and said, well, we're PCI compliant, we're secure, everything's fine. But really understanding that, okay, we're compliant. We've reached, that's the training to the start line at the Olympics, and then afterwards, that's the race. So that's where you start from.
Compliance is not equal security.
No, that's not.
I'll just add to, I see frameworks, coming from Vancouver, it is a much more less mature from a security perspective economy. So when they realize that security is important, either legally speaking or to start, and that's where I think frameworks help with building up that that roadmap of security enlightenment, and them understanding it's a journey. On the flip side, though, like again, these standards are great. We audit ourselves against it, and we get into the 90% compliant rate, but that's still spot audits of something that just changed, and we don't know how it changed. So it is, there's a great quote from DEF CON this year where, and why were we talking about compliance at DEF CON? But it was a Sky Talk, so it wasn't recorded on the record. They said standards is just to deal with the dumb stuff. It gets you to the line, right? And it is by no means to say that I'm compliant and therefore I am that we understand risk a little bit better than just buying firewalls and not understanding why we're buying firewalls.
And I think for my point is, well, I think I totally agree. I think for us, standards are the minimum set of requirements that you actually have to comply with. And then there's got to be stuff on top of it, right? So you're not just going to say I comply with standards, that's good enough, because the dynamics of cyber threats keeps changing. So we actually say, okay, look, standard is the basic stuff, and then let's build on top of it.
So to that,
Yep.
as things are moving forward, everything's changing all the time. How do you build a community culture in and around that model that's constantly changing?
Well, you know what? If I go back to previous jobs and the jobs I had, and even this one, I don't think the education ever stopped. I think we talked earlier briefly. Every day, educating your new staff coming into the organization through first orientation versus the executives that you're still dealing with, or the new executives coming in, to the whole spectrum. It's all about education. My role, I feel like I started out in the technical role. I think I'm probably the least technical person on the team now, just because of the fact that my role is very much focused on how do I build the education in the organization, how do I promote the cybersecurity program, what sort of KPIs and KRIs and stuff I need to present to the board and to the C-level to really keep pushing the envelope. How do I identify the risk? So when you talk about the culture, to me, it's starting from the top. And we look at our executives because we want to mimic that behavior. So to me, it's like starting at the top, educating those guys, and then trickling down to the organization. So we do a lot of things from the standpoint of security education, as I mentioned, day one, phishing simulations, of course, lunch and learn. We do hackathons, for example, either for IT staff or broadly, just to keep the momentum going. You get being in the forefront at all times. It's not, it's not that, if you go back 20, 30 years ago in the mainframe days and we had the security guys, and if you had security guys that were probably in some office somewhere. This is all about being in the front all the time and getting the message across.
So you're mentioning in the book that you've got hub and spoke
Yep.
business lines.
Yep.
So do you do peer challenges against lines of business? So do KPI management where they compete against each other?
We haven't gone to the competition part yet. I think we discussed this quite some time to say, should we have the BUs against BUs and who's red, yellow versus green and so forth. Maybe a healthy competition, but I don't think we've gotten there yet. But I think we definitely are at a point where we're actually saying, okay, look, what is use the security office as a center of excellence, but then have your security advisors spread across the business units. And it's, you can take two flavors, right? You can do a flavor where you have security advisors, solution architects that are within the security office and they parsed out to the business, and we try that. Or you can have business units that are advocating or assigning someone, either by hiring or existing person, to say, look, maybe you want to become a risk guy or security guy, and I think the latter is the better option over the years I've noticed, just because the trust is there, the loyalty is with the business, and it works really well from that point of view. So that's been the mantra that I keep pushing that all the time to say, look, and it doesn't have to be a technical person, right? I don't need a technical person. I don't want business folks to become security people. I want business folks to do what they do best, and they give me the opportunity to get my message across through the conduit with one person, one or two people within the business unit.
Right. So Alex, you and I were having a conversation earlier about the cultural changes in just across Canada, how different areas of Canada think about security in different ways and place different values on different aspects of security. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, again, I worked in protected BA facilities for the first part of my career. So when I moved out to Vancouver, I worked on the Olympics, and failure was not an option. So we still took security seriously. But once I went to consult in the private sector, I really thought my experience was going to be a major asset to the IT community of of Western Canada, but there was definitely less maturity when it comes to risk management, less awareness, and everyone was just jumping into the cloud. And you know, at that point, 2010, 2011, like cloud by nature did not have security bolted on. It has changed now, but I kept on losing arguments and even engagements because I was too secure.
So, and from Trillium Health Services, can you talk about how managing culture is a challenge, or what does it look like?
Yeah, so we deal with a very interesting demographic throughout the hospital. Very technical folks. We also deal with a lot of physicians, and so for us, it's really about a conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue. I look at and kind of bring it back to compliance. Compliance would say, oh, okay, do annual testing and maybe like quarterly notification, and I would compare that to almost like a power plant, where instead you have to kind of get down and have a seat at the table and just an open conversation. People will often, they will understand and they will comply and they will take what you were saying a lot more serious if you meet them one-on-one or at their level and you give them additional context. If you just say, hey, don't click on links, it's bad, they don't necessarily know what that means. If you say, don't do this or don't do that, but when you start opening up and peeling back the layers and giving them additional context to why you shouldn't be doing this, the risk that this behavior that they're doing is posing to the organization, they're a lot more likely. So that's for us.
Place them into the context.
Exactly. So for us, like that's our biggest strategy. It's just ongoing engagement, conversation. We do the phishing campaigns. We do, we of course do the annual awareness campaign as well. But advisories. We also try to advisory send out just on a personal note. This is what we're seeing just outside of the hospital. We want to be their resource.
And that's with our industry community. We're also attempting to build a culture of security within the information services division itself as well. So we've put together a pretty informal information security working group, or I guess it's a committee. And in there we've got members from the various teams and other leaders who are really kind of coming together to talk about emerging threats, things that we can do that beyond that which we're doing already. And I think what we've seen now, we've seen other leaders proactively identify things that we would identify and bubble it up so that we can collectively as a division tackle problems that historically would have been solely just on security's radar. So I think we're really beginning to see, a year and a half in, some traction actually and some momentum build within our division and technology division to help, bridge some of those gaps.
So let me just, I think that's a very good point. So I think when we talk about hub and spoke, one thing I should have mentioned is look for security champions, right? So if somebody else is talking about cyber beside the security team, that has a 10x value versus us talking about it. So one of the things I think I made a point in my career is finding folks that were receptive to IT risk or security and building relationship. Go for coffee or whatever else it works. Building relationships. So when you're in a meeting and you're trying to push your security agenda forward, and you got someone who's on the business side or corporate services comes out and say, yeah, that makes sense, let's do it. On my other, the way this carries is so much more further than what you would actually ever be able to do. So I think from that point of view, having a journey, but it is a conscious effort. You have to do it. You have to go out and search those people, and in some cases, spend a lot of time nurturing to make them part of your security mandate.
And it goes both ways. So we bring issues, and they bring issues that maybe we're providing obstacles to them in their work. So it gives them a venue to kind of get solutions.
Right.
Yeah. And I just want to add something. So I think the one thing that I have found, like my role within the organization is fairly unique. I'm not a manager, but definitely what I've learned in this larger organization is you definitely get a lot more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
Sure.
And so when you're dealing with your IS counterparts, it's not always helpful to come back and say, well, you have to do this because it's security. You have to. And they're going to, a lot of times, push back because they don't like to be told what to do. But if you form those strategic relationships and you sit down and you meet them where they are, and also, if you can spin it in any way possible so it'll benefit them, they'll be all over.
I'll add to that. So first of all, October is Security Awareness Month. So this weekend, as you're cutting the turkey, have that discussion with your family. And that's actually how, when I run security awareness programs for clients, is we'll use the CBT stuff. You know, it's commoditized, but we do an in-person lunch and learn first. And unlike corporate training, which is, you know, boring and people are just going to spend that hour trying to figure out how to cheat going through the training rather than just doing the training, we put the curriculum.
We don't do that.
We create the training that it has nothing to do with the company. In fact, we say this training has nothing to do with the company. We want to bring this subject matter up to you so you bring it home to your family and have that discussion at the dinner table. Because as soon as they care about something they care about, then they are actually going to care about what's happening at the business because they can relate to it. By bombarding people with CBT training on phishing and whatnot, there's no context without understanding how it is victimizing their kids and their parents.
And you know, I had a phrase that I've been using for the last many years, which is make security personal. And I think that's the only way to get, or not the only way, but I think that's one way to get the message across. To say if it's personally important to you, then it'll make a difference no matter how much you try to talk about the business context and all that. I think it's got to personally get the message somehow.
So mixing the two concepts together, we know that we need security awareness across the company, and I'm sure we're all practicing this today, and we are developing individuals within the lines of business and bringing them up in a risk methodology or a mindset. Do we have specific training, or are we looking at specific training for those individuals now within the company? Do we provide that? Is that something or an opportunity?
That silence is deafening.
Right?
You know, I guess it's like, well, what is that training out there that would be really adequate to somebody that information security or risk management isn't their primary goal? It is a responsibility of everyone that's using the computer at the company, but what is that training? Like, is there anything out on the market that is reasonably priced?
So is this a gap in our general space?
Like,
I think there's a lot of organizations that try to fill that gap, but like a lot of the CBT stuff is generic, right? So like a lot of stuff that we've done, we try to do it customized. We try to meet them again where they are and make it a little more personal. I haven't really come across any really good training that I would give it to our entire organization.
Yep.
But let me flip it around, right? That was a discussion on making security personal. I think why do I flip it around and say, how do you secure your home computer? How do you secure your home Wi-Fi? How do you secure your home banking information, right? So that's what I meant by personal. I meant, let's say, look, if I, as an example, you know, if I'm spending $1 million from an organization versus $10,000 from my personal bank account, trust me, I've got a more attachment to that 10K versus $1 million, and just the way the life is. So then I'm more suggesting, look, maybe I want to train the employees to how to keep their home life and personal life secure with the understanding and hoping the assumption that behavior then translated to the corporate world, because then I can attach and say, look, if I am protecting my home this way, maybe I need to do the same as work as well. So that's what I meant when I said, you know, the shift of that focus needs to be maybe different. Maybe we're tackling it differently to say, look, why do we keep focusing that, you know, don't send this data out, don't do this and that, versus saying, look, this is maybe how we need to do our home security better, right?
Now, are you using using off-the-shelf training or just kind of training you've developed within your organization?
No, it's all customized. Yeah. Off the shelf is difficult. It's all customized. If you want to go that direction, it's all going to be customized. And again, every industry, every organization is going to be different, right? You got to find what the right balance, how much you want to force, how much you really want to be able to say things, right? Versus what's in the marketplace.
So I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. So we've been talking about employee training, culture, and frameworks and such. But Alex's chapter is on cloud adoption and you know the fact that we shouldn't be as worried maybe as we currently are in moving things to the cloud. So have at it, sir.
the elevator pitch?
The elevator pitch.
You know, like for me, working in you know the government space, it was like we can't put that data on somebody else's computer, especially something across a border. And that's that idea of like we sort of like a throat to choke. We want to be able to touch our data. And while there are certainly use cases to have that functionality, the cloud offers a lot of other functionality that may take a higher priority in terms of managing risk. You know, we're doing a lot of assessments across enterprises of like how well are they doing. I'm a big fan of critical security controls. It's a framework that is very technical and easy to understand. You know, we just never, you know, we're not going to achieve perfect compliance with that standard ever. And that's because there's just certain parts of IT that we're gonna always suck at. And cloud affords us the opportunity to actually outsource the stuff we don't really want to be good at anyways. You know, looking at it from a hardware perspective, never having to worry about building RAIDs and disk failures, like that's a huge win. Managing databases, big pain in the butt. Well, now we can actually externalize that to the cloud service provider that sort of knows how to do it better, and we can focus on what we're really good at. Because everything is on you know, this common management backplane, we now have a queryable interface, something that we can ask it questions. Sorry, not interface, environment. We can ask it questions, and it'll give us very accurate answers. And I just, you know, I always encourage people that have data centers, like, tell me all the systems in your data center accurately, and I'll give you 4 hours to do it. I just did it right now in my AWS environment, right? Like, there's a major benefit to that, and that means that we can apply risk better, or risk management practices better, and actually have a lot of visibility and continuous compliance within an environment that we just couldn't get from a traditional environment.
Also, all the new tooling that's in place, you know, that you can subscribe to, like almost like an app store. You know?
They have appified IT. Again, all the things that we, you know, have to spin up something separate. Now it is almost an app that we can use. And then, you know, like, I sort of joke, so the IaaS is essentially spinning up a virtual server. Platform as a service, or PaaS, is a managed database, and SaaS is any of the software that we've been using. Well, IaaS just exists for us Luddites to get into the cloud, but it is actually not the end-all and be-all. That's just there, it's our stepping stone. The future of using cloud is going to be looking at really not even owning the operating system. I sort of think that operating systems are going to be for hobbyists in a few years, just like Linux is. We're not going to have to care about the operating system, the patching, the configuration. That will be managed by somebody that just is going to do it better than us. And thus, we can put our applications on and our code on top of that, worry about what's actually important to us, and outsource the rest.
So I think we could probably have a whole day discussion on cloud. I think, and I think you're right. Cloud does provide a lot of the flexibility. I fill a lot of gaps in the sprinkler. But I think the challenge in my mind, and we're also in the cloud to some degree, and that's not trying to bash cloud. I think it's a good tool to have, and for a lot of the organization, I think that don't have big IT staff, it's amazing. And I also feel like if you were starting a new startup and going to the cloud, that's a much better clean slate than anything else. The hybrid model where a lot of the established organizations are trying to create on-prem and then so forth. But the challenge I've noticed, and I've actually put it forward to a bunch of the cloud providers as well, is the transparency thing. So I totally agree the IaaS space and PaaS space to say, look, you know, we got all the bells and whistles, we got certifications and ISO NIST and all that and CSA. But the challenge is I don't know what that actually means at the end of the day, what's behind that certifications, right? And I've asked the pro cloud providers, and if you're a bit more open from a transparency point of view regarding what actually goes into the assessment, how they get certified, what sort of things, testing you're doing on your employees, for example, who may have access from the IaaS to my data, for example, or database. I think it will help a lot of organizations, even the regulators for that matter. I think one of the hesitation I'm noticing with the regulators, and we're definitely in a very in a regulatory environment, is the fact there's a lack of transparency when it comes to understanding the fundamental controls that go into the cloud services.
I would expect very similar regulatory controls in the healthcare industry, right?
Not near as probably what the TSX is. But for us, we're a very conservative organization. We have some cloud services that we subscribe to, but in terms of our infrastructure in the cloud, we've been very slow to adopt that. And I think the reason why is because we can't get over the idea of, you know, like, there's our box, that's our box. Like, the box is right there. It's in the rack, and there's blinking lights, and you like that. So it is going to be a shift in culture.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that we were talking before the panel was that, you know, with, I think begin to kind of dovetail into our earlier conversation, with cloud comes the need for a greater level of compliance and awareness. You can do things equally as bad on-prem as in the cloud. It's just on the cloud, there's greater consequences, right? Like on the cloud, you're everybody's sandbox. On-prem, you're your employee's sandbox. So you have to be.
Did we get that soundbite?
Yeah, you have to be just aware of that and make sure that you know that you need to do that. I suspect probably you've probably seen where organizations have gone to the cloud not realizing, kind of assuming that security was kind of baked in, and then realizing 5 or 6 months after, oh, you mean I have to actually secure this, and this isn't just part of the service that I pay. So,
and I definitely say cloud is more secure if you let it. So it is very important to understand that it is a lot on our responsibility. It's a whole talk on shared responsibility model, but I joke with what the problem with the cloud, why we see breaches on the weekly, is that it's an us problem, not a them problem. It's because how we're using it, how we're adopting it. We look at the 3 cloud adoption anarchists. We got the CIO that wants to get out of the data center business by November, so he's going to lift and shift, bringing all his garbage into the cloud. And a better way of saying what Bobby said is, if you suck at security in your data center, you can totally suck at security.
I didn't say that. I think he did. I said it was all great.
Second, the dev adopters, they're doing it because they want modern tools, they want to get away from all the supervision of security, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course we have all the other business units that just want to go, it's essentially the digital transformation initiative where they're running to SaaSes. And a crazy stat here, and I'm hoping it's still accurate, is 80% of the cloud is not AWS and Azure, which sounds crazy. 80% of the cloud is SaaS. Now you're going to say, well, SaaS sits on AWS, and of course it does. But who do you have the contract with?
Right.
Good.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up with each one of you is going to think about and give me one thing that you would like to push forward as something to endow our audience as far as how you would, sorry, I'm tripping over my tongue here. One thing that you would give us to secure your environment better, whether it's governance, people, technology.
I would say it's all 3. But to be honest with yourself, there's nothing wrong with when you are comparing yourself against a checklist or a framework or whatever. Be honest with you, there's nothing wrong with saying, that's not in place.
Yeah.
And it's helpful when you say it's not in place, why is it in place? Identify, is it a technology gap, is it a personnel gap, is it a policy gap? If you were to do either of those 3, I would probably say start with policy. Someone asked me once if I had 10 minutes, would I buy a firewall or write a policy on how to configure a firewall? For me personally, I would write a policy on configuring a firewall because I'd rather have that than a firewall that's giving me false sense of security and it's completely open.
You're saying about understanding if something's not in place. And from a risk perspective, it's perfectly acceptable to say, I understand everything we have. I do understand what we don't have in place. I accept that for now, and we're not going to do anything about it.
Right.
Perfectly acceptable.
I'm going to take a bit of a different spin. I think the governance policy and people stuff is all important. Don't take me wrong, but I think I've been looking into the fact that what is my role or CISO's role looks like over the next few years? What is cybersecurity looks like in the next few years? And then talking to my team a bit about the zero trust model. I think we've been putzing around it for almost 10 plus years. Really haven't done much. But if you look at the discussion we're having about the cloud, look at the remote users. We're looking at a data center just becomes one node on your network now versus the node. Zero trust model at the end of the day will be pretty important. So I'm just trying to understand what does that look like if you fast forward 2, 3, 4 years down the road. What does that look like from a roles perspective? How it's going to interact? So if you something to think about is that if you're looking into the future, what that future hold is look at some of the zero trust model stuff, see how that's going to help us help us down the road on how, as the parameter gets more fluid and everybody from an internally point of view becomes external as well, right?
So does that work into the identity as perimeter?
Oh, absolutely. There's identity parameter. There's you know, if you look at all the logging and monitoring, the dynamic rule-based SDN and so forth, you know, rather than looking at, to your point, like the firewalls, it's more being dynamic. Open the port for a certain transaction and close the port down or the access down. Yep, absolutely. Perfect.
You know, in the last few years, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of cool startups and even mid-sized businesses in the BC market that security became a thing by gunpoint. Mostly because of privacy laws in the EU, we're pushing the big, you know, Fortune 2000 companies to be more secure and more privacy-centric, which inherently meant that their supply chain also needed to support that. And you know, unfortunately, a lot of these companies, like their security advisor is also a vendor salesperson, and thus they end up approaching it from a technology thing. So they become technology rich and process poor. So again, the question of firewall or policy of firewall, it's got to be, you got to understand your why before your how. And defining, you know, with these startups, they can't afford enterprise grade security, but they want to sell to enterprise. So they need to lay a foundation, a risk management strategy that it will be extensible, that they can put in the enterprise grade equipment as they grow, but it gives the buyer the confidence that they do understand what risks are out there and they have a framework to grow with the threats.
Due diligence seldom starts with putting a tool in.
Yep, absolutely.
And building on that, what I'll offer is, you know, working in healthcare, hospital-acquired infections are a huge problem, and researchers are developing new procedures, implementing new technology to help reduce the risk associated with that. But at the end of the day, one of the best practices that healthcare providers and visitors to the hospital can do is just wash their hands. And so leveraging that example, you know, patch your systems, the solutions to a lot of problems until we get to like a fully baked zero trust model is to really just make sure our basic security hygiene is in place. We're patching things, we're verifying that patches have been applied, and you know, really starting from the basics and really making sure that those are solidly in place.
Awesome. Do we have any time for questions from the audience?
Yes, we do. We've got the mic here. Anybody has any questions? Raise your hand. I'll pass it to you.
We must have done a great job.
Wow.
Oh, poor putting
Thanks for the great talks. There is a chapter in the book that focuses on how users have got accustomed to links. Right? Over the years, we have trained them to click on links, and suddenly we are saying it's insecure to click on them, be careful. So what efforts are being taken across organizations to move away from that culture? Because we are sending phishing awareness presentations, please click on this link to register, right? And people are wondering, is this a phishing test?
I think what we're seeing too at our hospital is that there is an over-reliance on email as a communication tool. There's so much information, there's an email overload problem where users are inundated with memos from this department, everything's going to all users. And I think part of the solution, in addition to just phishing education, is to share information with our employees in a more meaningful way where they seek the information out rather than having it pushed to them in a way where we're no longer sharing information via links and attachments, and instead maybe they're going to some communication portal where they can proactively go and pull information from to get away from that model of sharing information links, file attachments through email. That's one possible way.
Sorry. When I sent out the sign on to the KnowBe4 platform, I did have to put, I get the irony of having you click on this link. You know, it's really like what we need to be doing is teaching them, you know, do a sniff test on the links and how to be able to validate it without necessarily exposing themselves to those risks. You're right, like we've been teaching them not to click on things, and that could actually be a business inhibitor because there are lots of legitimate reasons to click on links. It's been, again, a focus on, you know, you want to avoid, like, the world is covered, the cyber world is a minefield, and you want to, and we've been telling you how to walk, but you want to walk and get to the other side. So it's a matter of being able to detect what would look illegitimate.
I know all of our systems today have the configuration ability to assist. So for instance, Office 365, Exchange, Gmail, they all have the ability to tell you that an email coming in is coming from either within your environment or externally outside your firewall. And putting that in a footer or a header in the email is easy to do, and visually it's a great asset. Things like having, so right now you've got a button for junk mail, but there's an article on Microsoft's Office 365 to copy that button and create a spam button or a phishing button. And when you click on it, it goes to your technical team, so they know that these messages are coming in and can block it from others, but it also goes off to Microsoft so that it can block it from other organizations.
Yeah, actually, to that point, and what Dave mentioned about hand hygiene, that link or that header, that's free.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need to spend $90,000 a year. You just need to make a change to your Exchange environment or whatever it is. And a lot of times that's what it is. It's just a matter of hygiene. It definitely does create some challenges with communicating with your staff, because you're so, okay, I'll just send out this advisory and I'll tell them to click on this link because it's a new service, and you're like, okay, half of these people are going to now report it as spam. Which is great, which is a good problem to have, but it does kind of alter your communication channel. So we've had to rethink our communication strategy and now bake it into weekly newsletters where people are getting it. It's Trillium labeled, and it's from our staff, and then there's a little blurb. So that's approach that we take.
Any other questions? Okay, I'd like to thank our panel and have yourselves a great day.